President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu are at an impasse. Our president is strongly opposed to the Prime Minister's plan to invade Rafah, destroy Hamas, free the hostages.
Well, signs are emerging that indicate Biden is trying to force Netanyahu from power. And U.S. intelligence agencies publicly said that they believe his government has lost the support of the Israeli people. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell reports.
The tensions center on Israel's intention to advance into Rafah in Gaza to destroy Hamas and free Israeli hostages. The Biden administration pressuring Israel to put off the operation over concerns for Gazan refugees.
We will finish the job in Rafah while enabling the civilian population to get out of harm's way. You cannot say you support Israel's right to exist and to defend itself, and then oppose Israel when it exercises that right.
Jerusalem's deputy mayor told CBN News the battle over Rafah is crucial.
We know there's 4 battalions left of terrorists in Rafah. We know that all our hostages are in Rafah. So how on earth are we supposed to finish this war and win this war if we don't go to Rafah?
In the U.S., a group of Democrat senators, led by independent Bernie Sanders of Vermont, are calling on Biden to cut off military aid to Israel, claiming it's blocking U.S. humanitarian aid to Gaza. Delaware Senator Chris Coons, who did not sign the letter, told CBN News the U.S. has to balance Israel's security with protecting innocent Gazans.
I support Israel's right of self-defense, its obligation to defend itself against Hamas and to go into Rafah and to clean out the remaining Hamas military elements. But they cannot do that without first allowing innocent civilians a chance to pass through checkpoints and to relocate to the center or north of Gaza.
Behind the scenes, many see signs the Biden administration is trying to overthrow the Netanyahu government. Over the weekend, the New York Magazine quoted an Israeli expert who said, "I have been asked by a serious administration figure what it is that will force the Netanyahu coalition to collapse. They were interested in the mechanics. What can we demand which will collapse his coalition?" Tuesday, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal reported all U.S. intelligence agencies believe the Netanyahu government has lost the support of the Israeli people and is likely to be overthrown soon. Israeli media published a statement by a very senior government official. "We expect our friends to act to overthrow the terror regime of Hamas and not the elected government of Israel."
What they're saying is we want to overthrow our closest allied government in the Middle East and do it in the middle of an existential war for its own survival, which is an amazing thing.
A recent Times of Israel poll shows that 75% of Israelis back an Israeli operation into Rafah, one of the main war goals of the Netanyahu government.
Well, for more on this story, Chris Mitchell joins us now from Jerusalem. So what about this U.S. intelligence report that Netanyahu has lost the support of the people of Israel? What are you seeing?
Well, actually, Gordon, I'm not seeing that. I'm actually seeing the opposite. I see support for the government and its war aims, like that poll. It said 75% of Israelis support this. For Israelis, you know, Gordon, you sensed this, I think, when you were here just a few days ago. It's an existential war. They know that October 7th changed Israelis, and right now, Israel of October 7th is not the Israel of October 6th. They're fighting for their survival, and Netanyahu right now is supporting those war aims that Israel agrees with. So this report, to me anyway, doesn't ring true from what I've seen and heard from Israelis. Not sure what they're looking at. Here, it seems like more like the U.S. support. The recent poll said 82% of Americans support Israel. I think that's the same thing here. The administration may be incurring protests against the government, but so far the coalition is standing strong. And you could only see a collapse in the coalition if those main parties disagree, but we don't see any signs of that right now.
Is this a continuation of the policy of the Obama administration? I mean, they actively campaigned against him. U.S. political operatives were operating in Israel during one of the elections during Obama's. You reported on this. Is this just a continuation? They just don't like Benjamin Netanyahu?
I think that's a great point. It's something I've been thinking about today as well, Gordon. This could be Obama 2.0, 3.0. You know, there was a major disagreement between the Obama administration and the Netanyahu government back then. And you can remember as well, during those differences between the White House and Netanyahu, Netanyahu actually went to the Congress and he made his case against the Iranian nuclear deal. And in effect, that actually strengthened Netanyahu here. And I think, ironically, for the Biden administration, some of the things that they are doing trying to come against the Netanyahu government now is actually strengthening him. And I'll give you two examples. One is that the Biden administration is trying to impose a two-state solution. Netanyahu is firmly against that, and that's exactly what Israelis want him to do, push back against a two-state solution. The other issue is humanitarian aid. Israelis are against that. Not that they're against giving humanitarian aid to the Gazan people, but they know that much of that humanitarian aid is not going to the Gazan people, but it's going to Hamas, and it's actually hurting the military effort there in the Gaza Strip. So those are two examples of how the Biden administration is pushing against the Netanyahu government, but it's actually, ironically, strengthening him here in Israel.
Well, let's talk about something that happened last week where Benny Gantz, a popular Israeli politician, he went to the U.S. for meetings, and then Benjamin Netanyahu famously said there's only one prime minister, indicating that that trip was unauthorized. Is somehow this trip part of that? Is Benny Gantz being positioned to become the new prime minister?
We were just talking about that here in the Bureau, Gordon. We think that could be, you could connect those dots. He went over to the White House, met with those in the State Department. They may be seeing Gantz as a heir apparent to Netanyahu. He is ahead in the polls right now. But I'll tell you some recent news, and some people call it, you know, sort of a mini political earthquake. A man named Gideon Sa'ar, and I think this is a little bit inside baseball here, but he's part of Gantz's party, and he's just declaring he's leaving that party. So what this is actually doing right now is weakening Gantz, his standing here in Israel, and it's actually strengthening Netanyahu. Gideon Sa'ar actually wants to be part of the war cabinet, and this mini political earthquake could be seen as a response to the U.S. pressure against the Netanyahu government and that famous, well-known visit by Benny Gantz to the White House and Washington.
Well, what is the public response in Israel? Is this in some way damaging our relationship? That if our administration is somehow meddling and perceived and actually meddling in the politics, what's that going to do?
Well, I think it's going to, at least in terms of Israeli support for the United States, I don't think there's any question about that. In terms of their response or opinion about the Biden administration, that may be a whole different matter. You know, many people, it's no secret that Netanyahu's was popularity before October 7th was divided between many people here in Israel. But Israelis really don't want to change leaders in the middle of a war. You know, you sense this too, I think, Gordon, when you were here. Israelis are shell-shocked after October 7th, and what the Biden administration is doing now could actually backfire on them, actually strengthen Netanyahu. And as I said, two issues. Humanitarian aid is one. The two-state solution is another. If there's anything that could be tone deaf after October 7th is this idea of imposing a two-state solution on Israel. Hamas is a non-starter. Nobody wants Hamas in any sort of a Palestinian government. And they know enough about what's happening in the last 30 years with the Palestinian Authority, and they don't want them as well. So the Biden administration is pushing a couple of efforts and policies that really are not being very popular here with Israelis.
Well, what I saw in Israel is, yes, people were absolutely shocked at the extent of the horror, the brutality of what happened on October 7th, an attempt to humiliate Israel. They were then grieving and deeply grieving what had happened and what they were being forced to do. But I also sensed an absolute resolve they're going to finish the job. Hamas has lost the right to exist. And if you're going to pledge that we're going to do this again and again and again, well, not on our watch, you're not going to do it. And they really want to take them out. So I assume Netanyahu isn't going to bow to U.S. pressure or international pressure. It's going to go into Rafah. It's going to do what he said he's going to do, which Hamas needs to end. So what's the timeline? When can we expect that to happen?
Well, I'm not sure about the timeline, Gordon. It's been on hold for weeks now. We had an Israeli official here in our bureau yesterday. We asked him the same question. He said, well, he wasn't going to offer any timeline, but we know there's massive U.S. and international opposition against that. And but the question many Israelis are asking, on the one hand, you're telling us you have a right to defeat Hamas. On the other hand, you're stopping Israel from doing that. And one other question, Gordon, is the question some people are asking, what about Egypt? Why aren't they helping out on the refugee issue? One thing I've heard in the last 24 hours is that Blinken, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, went to Egypt right after October 7th and talked about refugees in the Sinai Peninsula, and Egypt said no. But the issue here in the Middle East is no didn't mean no. It really meant how much. In other words, how much more can you give us? So whether or not Egypt's going to help out this situation and allowing some of those refugees to go into the Sinai Peninsula as sort of a relief value and allow Israel to go ahead and enter Rafah without the number of refugees remains to be seen.
Well, I actually think his no really does mean no. When you look at the history, when the Palestinians were brought into Jordan and given refuge, there's still a lot of Palestinians in Jordan. But one of the things they tried to do is overthrow the king. And so Jordan kicked them out. And where'd they go? They went to Lebanon, which says, we have the answer here. We know how to live in peace, and all the religions live in peace here. We're the jewel of the Mediterranean. Everything's great. Come on in. And they've absolutely destroyed the country. What I visited in 1969, by a decade later, was completely gone. I think Egypt is well aware of that history and doesn't want that radical element anywhere near them. They want them way outside their national borders. It's going to be interesting how to deal with the refugee issue. You know, would they, you know, should Israel set up camps in northern Gaza and put them there? It's a very difficult time and very much a time for us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem and to pray for Israel and pray for the people who, if they don't get out, it's going to be absolutely horrible. Well, Chris, thanks so much for joining with us.
Thanks, Gordon.
For everyone at home, I've taken a vow I would never interfere. I would never comment on Israel's politics. It's just not a place for an American citizen to do. I'm obviously an interested observer, and I keep track of it. But I don't feel I have any role in that. Why does our government feel we have a role? That somehow or other, if they don't like the policies coming out of Benjamin Netanyahu, that they can engineer his defeat and engineer election. Let our government know this isn't something we should do. And you look back at the history of U.S. meddling in foreign politics in other countries, it's not a good history. It's not a good track record. And my opinion, and it's a very strong one, this shouldn't happen, and this shouldn't be, particularly with our closest ally in the world and in the Middle East. So hands off.